Have you ever been forced to prove that you deserve to stand where you already belong? JFK International Airport hummed like an overworked beehive, voices clashing and echoing against cold glass walls. Passengers hurried past each other, dragging lives in heavy suitcases and tired eyes. Yet in a quiet corner of the VIP lounge, Eleanor Whitmore sat untouched by the storm. A cup of Earl Grey rested between her palms, its thin steam curling into the air like a fragile secret. She gazed through the floor-to-ceiling window, where planes crawled across the tarmac under a gray morning sky. Her salt-and-pepper curls framed a face marked by years of silent battles and victories won without applause. To everyone else, she looked like an elegant older woman, perhaps a retired professor or an art curator. But beneath that composed exterior burned a fire only she could feel. A fire kindled by decades of sitting in boardrooms where she was the only one who looked like her. A fire that kept her spine straight when the world tried to bend it. Across the lounge, a young entrepreneur in a crisp navy suit noticed her. He lowered his phone, eyes narrowing in quiet curiosity. Next to him, an elderly man adjusted his silk scarf, catching Eleanor's calm presence and instinctively straightening his posture, as if her very existence demanded respect without words. Eleanor did not seek their gazes. She carried her dignity like an invisible crown, one she had crafted herself from countless silent humiliations and quiet triumphs. Meanwhile, outside the glass walls, the airport's chorus swelled. Announcements overlapped, names spilled out like broken prayers, and engines roared as if impatient for the sky. In that sea of sound, Eleanor took a slow sip of tea. Each swallow felt like an anchor, reminding her she had earned every seat she took, every room she walked into, every breath of belonging. But deep inside, she knew. No matter how many summits she conquered, no matter how many times she built a bridge for others to cross, there would always be eyes waiting to question her right to be there. And today, she would face it again, not with anger, not with loud protests, but with a stillness so powerful that it would echo louder than any shout ever could. Have you ever felt the air shift when you enter a room, as if your very presence rattled the walls people thought were unbreakable? JFK International Airport felt like a living creature that morning. The endless buzz of rolling suitcases, hurried steps, and impatient sighs wove into a restless symphony. Above it all, the loudspeakers barked boarding calls and delays in a steady, cold rhythm. Eleanor Whitmore sat alone in the VIP lounge, her cane resting neatly against her chair. The cane's carved handle shimmered under the soft golden lights, like a quiet testament to battles fought long before this day. She wore a deep blue tailored suit, sharp lines hugging her frame, and a white silk scarf wrapped elegantly around her neck. Her salt-and-pepper curls glowed with a quiet pride, each strand a memory of years spent demanding respect in rooms that never welcomed her. She looked out at the runway. Planes lined up like giant birds waiting for flight, their metal skin catching the pale morning light. She watched them with a stillness that spoke louder than any words. Across from her, Daniel Reeves, a young tech entrepreneur in a gray blazer, paused his typing. His eyes flicked to Eleanor with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. He had seen many powerful people here, but there was something different about her. A gravity, a calm authority that silenced the air around her. Near the corner, Margaret Holloway, an art historian with silver hair tied in a low bun, adjusted her reading glasses. Her gaze drifted to Eleanor, and for a moment she forgot the art magazine on her lap. People felt something in Eleanor's presence before they understood it, as if they were standing in front of a vast ocean, sensing its depth without needing to see the bottom. Eleanor took a slow breath. She remembered all the times she had to rehearse every word before a meeting, the way her heart used to thud before stepping on stages lined with skeptical faces. Yet today, she felt none of that old fear, only a steady warmth rising from somewhere deep inside her chest. Beyond the glass, engines growled, and tarmac lights blinked like distant fireflies. But inside this lounge, time seemed to stretch and slow. Eleanor lifted her cup of tea, letting the warmth curl into her fingers. Every small movement felt deliberate, each sip a gentle reclaiming of space she had fought for all her life. In another part of the lounge, Jessica Monroe walked briskly, checking her passenger list. Her platinum blonde hair was pinned into a flawless bun, and her emerald green uniform hugged her perfectly. She moved like a conductor in a private orchestra, quick glances sharp as knives, voice crisp as fresh paper. Jessica noticed Eleanor. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. A pause in her step, a tightness in her jaw, inside her, a quiet discomfort rose. She didn't understand it fully, only that something about Eleanor's poise felt like a challenge she wasn't prepared to face. Jessica turned her head away quickly, masking the small storm bubbling inside her. She scanned other passengers, eager to distract herself. But Eleanor had already felt it. The silent ripple in the air, the questioning energy aimed her way. She didn't flinch. Instead, she placed her tea back on the saucer with a soft clink and leaned back in her chair. Eleanor knew today would not be just another flight. She felt the familiar shadow approaching, that old whisper questioning her worth, demanding she prove herself once again. Yet she stayed rooted in her seat, as if she were a mountain carved by time and storms, unyielding and patient. The boarding call began to echo through the lounge, voices blending into a low, endless hum. Eleanor reached for her cane and stood up slowly, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Across the room, Jessica watched her rise. Her fingers clenched around her tablet, her breath tightening as she forced a polite smile. Eleanor took one final look at the lounge, a kingdom she had claimed with decades of grace and silent strength. Then she turned toward the gate, each step a silent declaration. She did not hurry. She never had to. And as she moved, every eye seemed to follow her, pulled by something they couldn't quite name, but deeply felt. The hallway to gate C-23 pulsed with the rhythm of hurried footsteps and rolling suitcases. Voices collided and scattered, creating a restless wave of noise that rose and fell like a storm caught inside glass walls. Eleanor stepped forward, each movement measured and unhurried. Her cane tapped lightly against the polished floor, echoing like a soft drumbeat calling her forward. Passengers rushed past her, heads down, eyes glued to boarding passes, lost in private worlds of deadlines and destinations. Some brushed her shoulder without apology, some glanced quickly, unsure whether to offer help or to hurry on. But Eleanor kept moving, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Behind the counter at the gate, Jessica Monroe stood, posture rigid, her eyes scanning the line with practiced impatience. Her green uniform was immaculate, her platinum hair untouched by a single stray strand. She held her passenger list like a shield, flicking through names as if she were reading a script written only for her. Jessica glanced up and froze for a fraction of a second when she saw Eleanor approaching. There it was again, that quiet disturbance in her chest. The same feeling she had back in the lounge, a heat she couldn't name, burning beneath the surface. She forced a thin smile and looked away, pretending to adjust her earpiece. Eleanor reached the front of the line, her breathing calm, her presence so steady it seemed to slow the entire space around her. Jessica took a deep breath. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor like small shots fired into the air. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" Her voice was smooth but edged with something sharp and cold. Eleanor handed over the pass without a word. Her fingers did not tremble. Her eyes met Jessica's, deep and unwavering. Jessica glanced at the name, her mind hesitating for a moment longer than it should have. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs, but she quickly masked it with a polite nod. "Thank you," she said, but her tone felt like a locked door rather than an invitation. Eleanor received the pass back and took a small step forward, but Jessica's hand shot out, blocking her gently yet firmly. "Excuse me," Jessica said, her lips barely moving, her smile still frozen. "Could you please wait a moment? I need to verify something with my system." A man in a gray coat behind Eleanor shifted impatiently. A mother holding a toddler side and rocked her baby gently, eyes darting between Eleanor and Jessica. Eleanor stood still, her gaze never leaving Jessica's face. The cane at her side caught a beam of light, reflecting it like a tiny lighthouse in a stormy sea. Jessica turned slightly, typing quickly on her tablet, her fingers tense. She pretended to check something important, but inside her thoughts spiraled. Why does she look so sure of herself? Why does she make me feel like the ground is shifting under my feet? Passengers began to murmur. A young couple leaned to each other, whispering with wide eyes. An elderly man pulled out his phone, holding it low but clearly recording. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quiet yet carrying a strength that filled the space between them. "Is there a problem?" Jessica hesitated, her lips parted then closed again. "No," she said sharply, almost too quickly. "No problem at all." She stepped aside reluctantly, her forced smile cracking at the edges. Eleanor moved forward once more. Each step felt like a ripple spreading through still water, unnoticed by some but impossible to ignore for others who truly looked. Behind her, Jessica exhaled, a small tremor running down her spine. She felt eyes on her, but she didn't dare turn to meet them. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed that this small moment was the beginning of something much larger than either of them could control. The gate buzzed again, a mechanical voice calling for final boarding. Eleanor kept walking. Her cane tapped softly. Her shoulders remained high. She did not look back, not once. Jessica's fingers tightened around the tablet, her nails digging into the plastic edge. A faint tremor ran up her arms as she watched Eleanor move toward the jet bridge. The gate area pulsed with a restless tension, passengers shifting on their feet, whispering behind hands, pretending to adjust bags so they could keep watching. Jessica's breath came shallow and sharp. In her mind, 1,000 small sparks of anger, fear, and confusion flashed at once. Who does she think she is? Why does she move like she owns the ground beneath her? Jessica stepped forward abruptly. "Ma'am." Her voice sliced through the air, louder than she intended. It rang like a sudden alarm in the waiting area. Eleanor paused. She turned slowly, her eyes calm as deep water. Her hand tightened slightly around her cane. Jessica marched forward, her heels striking the floor like gunshots echoing in a narrow hallway. "I need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her voice brittle, cracking under the weight of something she could not name. Eleanor looked at her, a quiet patience in her gaze that felt almost unbearable. She reached into her pocket and handed the boarding pass over once more, her movements smooth and dignified. Jessica snatched it from her hand, her fingers trembling. She held the pass up as if it might dissolve in her grip. Her eyes scanned the details again and again, the words blurring into each other. A bead of sweat slid down her temple. Her breath rattled in her throat. Passengers leaned in closer, eyes wide, phones discreetly lifted, ready to record whatever was coming next. Jessica's heart pounded so loudly it felt as if it might leap out of her chest. A voice inside screamed at her to stop, but she couldn't hear it anymore. She raised her hand high. In one harsh motion, she tore the boarding pass in half. Then again and again. The ripping sound burst through the silent gate area, sharp and final like a whip crack in an empty hall. Fragments of paper fluttered to the floor, drifting like pieces of a broken promise. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. A woman covered her mouth, her eyes filling with shock. A man dropped his coffee cup, the liquid spreading slowly across the floor. Eleanor stood motionless. Her gaze dropped to the torn pieces at her feet. Her cane wobbled slightly, then slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the tile. The sound echoed, a single note that seemed to hang in the air long after it should have faded. Eleanor bent down slowly, fingers wrapping around the cane with careful precision, as if lifting something sacred. She straightened up, her eyes locking onto Jessica's face. Her expression was not anger, nor was it sorrow. It was something deeper, a silence that spoke of storms survived, of battles fought alone in quiet rooms. Jessica's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Passengers stared, frozen in a collective breath they couldn't release. Eleanor's voice broke the silence, soft but strong enough to slice through the heavy air. "You've just made the gravest mistake of your life, young lady." Jessica flinched. Her shoulders jerked as if struck by an invisible hand. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some turned to each other, whispering in sharp, urgent tones. Others stood with eyes wide, phones shaking in their hands. Jessica stood there, her hands trembling, her mind a chaos she could no longer control. Eleanor did not wait for a reply. She shifted her cane slightly, straightened her shoulders, and took a single, deliberate step forward. Jessica's eyes followed her, a trapped, desperate animal hiding behind polished eyes and a perfect uniform. The gate area seemed to collapse into a deeper silence. Even the distant echo of announcements faded into nothing. Eleanor moved on, each step echoing in the stunned stillness, carrying the weight of every moment she had ever been told she did not belong. Jessica stood frozen. Around her, the world watched. And for the first time, she felt the unbearable gravity of a truth she had tried so hard to deny. Somewhere beyond the sea of eyes and flickering phones, Richard Montgomery stormed through the corridor. His black suit moved like a second skin, his sharp gaze slicing through the panicked whispers that trailed behind him. Every staff member he passed stepped back instinctively, heads lowered, lips tight with fear. Richard's reputation preceded him. Ruthless in crisis, uncompromising in discipline, yet fair in a way that cut deeper than cruelty ever could. He reached the gate area in seconds, his polished shoes hitting the floor like a steady war drum. When he stepped into view, the passengers fell silent, as if a sudden gust had stolen all their words. Jessica stood there, pieces of Eleanor's torn boarding pass still trembling in her hands. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Richard stopped in front of her, his tall frame casting a shadow over her small, trembling figure. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze slowly toward Eleanor. Their eyes met. And in that single look, something in the air shifted. Richard's face softened just for a moment. He gave a small, respectful nod, the kind of gesture a soldier might give a queen on a battlefield. "Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice low, carrying both reverence and dread. A ripple of shock raced through the crowd. Someone gasped loudly. Another dropped a phone, the plastic clattering on the tiles. Jessica's knees weakened. Her eyes darted between Richard and Eleanor, her mind refusing to accept the words she had just heard. "Chairwoman," Richard turned back to Jessica, his expression turning into cold steel. "Miss Monroe," he began, each syllable slow and deliberate. "Do you understand what you have done?" Jessica opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her lips trembled as she looked around for an escape that did not exist. Richard raised his voice just enough for every passenger to hear. "You have publicly humiliated the founder and CEO of this airline. The woman who built this brand with her own hands and carried it across the world. The very soul of this company." Passengers shifted, the collective realization dawning like a sunrise over a silent city. Phones now aimed not just at Jessica, but at Eleanor, capturing her calm, almost otherworldly stillness. Jessica staggered back a step, her eyes wide, her hands rising slightly as if to defend herself from invisible blows. Richard did not stop. "Your actions today have not only insulted her dignity, but they have shamed every single employee who believes in the values we stand for. You have betrayed the very heart of what we promise our passengers every day." Jessica's shoulders slumped. A tear finally escaped, sliding down her pale cheek. She tried to speak, a dry croak escaping her throat. I didn't know." Richard cut her off with a single sharp gesture. Silence. The word cracked like a whip, echoing off every polished surface. Eleanor stood nearby, watching. Her cane lightly touched the floor, her fingers resting on it with gentle strength. Her gaze did not carry hatred. It carried something heavier. A profound disappointment so deep it felt like standing at the edge of an endless ocean. Jessica lowered her head. Her hands dropped to her sides, fingers curling into fists. Richard exhaled, long and heavy, as if he were releasing the collective shame of the entire room. He turned to Eleanor once more. "Madam Chairwoman," he said softly, almost a plea. "On behalf of every employee here, I extend our deepest apologies." Eleanor did not speak. She only nodded, her eyes locked on Jessica, as if seeing through her, past every defense and every carefully painted layer she had worn for years. Jessica felt that gaze sink into her bones. Her entire world tilted, collapsing under a weight she had never known. In that silent space between them, the crowd watched. Watched as power was stripped away from a uniform and returned to the woman who had owned it all along. Watched as a quiet storm gathered in the depth of Eleanor's calm, ready to change not just one life, but every life that dared to look closely. Jessica's tears kept falling. She did not wipe them away. The truth was finally here, and it had no mercy. The terminal buzzed with a sharp, nervous electricity. Passengers stood frozen, some clutching phones, others clutching each other's arms as if bracing for an unseen impact. Jessica's face was pale, her breath shaky and uneven. She stared at the fragments of paper still clinging to her fingers, as if they might somehow piece themselves back together and erase what she had done. Richard stepped aside. His gaze burned into her, a silent command that offered no escape. A low murmur spread across the crowd. A young man whispered to his partner, "She's the CEO." She built the airline. A mother shushed her son, eyes wide, phone trembling in her hand. Jessica's legs wobbled. She looked at Eleanor, her mouth opening in desperate gasps for words that refused to come. Finally, Eleanor moved forward. Her cane tapped softly, each step echoing like a slow heartbeat through the heavy silence. She stopped just in front of Jessica. Their eyes met, two storms colliding in a quiet sky. Eleanor's voice rose, low and unhurried, yet it carried to every corner of the gate. "Would you apologize to me like this?" she began, her words slicing the air as cleanly as a blade. "If I were just an old black woman with no title, no power." "No name you recognized." Jessica's mouth quivered. Her eyes darted to the floor, to the walls, to the ceiling, anywhere but Eleanor's unwavering gaze. Passengers inhaled sharply, as if a single question had sucked the oxygen from the room. A man in a business suit lowered his phone, shame flickering across his face. A teenage girl's eyes brimmed with tears, her hand covering her mouth as she looked on. Jessica tried to speak, her voice cracked, thin and lost. I. Eleanor did not move, did not blink. Jessica's shoulders dropped. A sound escaped her lips, more sob than word, as her knees buckled slightly. The question hovered in the air, pressing against every chest, echoing inside every mind. "Would you?" Eleanor turned her head slowly, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. One by one, passengers looked away, their faces tight with discomfort, their own reflections suddenly too bright, too honest. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had crept inward, squeezing every hidden prejudice into the open light. Jessica's tears streamed freely now, unchecked, her lips trembling as she shook her head slowly. She knew the answer. Everyone did. Eleanor's gaze softened, but her voice remained unyielding. "Power should never be the reason for respect," she said, her tone calm but echoing with unspoken storms. "Humanity should be." Jessica collapsed into a silent sob, her hands covering her face, her body shaking with the weight of every unseen scar she had helped carve into others. Passengers watched, silent witnesses to a wound finally split open, too raw to hide. Eleanor took a step back, her cane steady beneath her hand. She did not offer comfort. She offered truth, and it was heavier than any punishment ever could be. The gate announcement crackled overhead, a cold reminder that life would continue beyond this moment, flights would depart, and people would return to their worlds. But for Jessica, for Eleanor, and for everyone watching, something fundamental had already changed, and it could never be unseen again. The plane hummed with a quiet tension as passengers settled into their seats. Soft overhead, lights glowed like distant stars in a pale sky. Jessica stood at the front of the first-class cabin, her hands shaking as she clutched the service tray. Her uniform felt tighter than ever, like an armor turned against her own skin. Eleanor sat in seat 1A, her posture regal yet at ease, a soft cashmere blanket draped over her lap. She gazed out the window, the clouds beyond drifting like silent witnesses. Jessica approached slowly, each step echoing in her mind as though she were crossing a thin sheet of ice. Can I get you something to drink, Ms. Whitmore?" Her voice was low, each word pushed out like a heavy stone. Eleanor turned, her eyes calm, ancient in their depth. "Black tea, no sugar, a slice of lemon," she said, her tone gentle but unyielding. Jessica nodded quickly, almost bowing before hurrying to the galley, her breath stuttered. Her reflection in the stainless steel walls looked back at her, pale, broken, unrecognizable. She prepared the tea with trembling hands. Hot water splashed, burning her skin, but she didn't flinch. The pain felt like a small penance, a tiny price. When she returned, she lowered the tray slowly onto Eleanor's table. Eleanor studied her, eyes moving carefully over every shaking movement, every tightened muscle. Jessica avoided her gaze, staring instead at the napkin she placed too precisely on the table edge. Have you ever questioned whether someone belonged somewhere just because of the way they looked? Eleanor asked, her voice soft enough to be mistaken for kindness but firm enough to pierce bone. Jessica swallowed hard, her lips parting but no sound coming out. Eleanor sipped her tea, her hand steady, her eyes still on Jessica. "This tea," she said quietly, "tastes exactly as it should, because you followed the instructions. You didn't decide it needed more or less, or that it wasn't worthy of being served." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. A small sound, half gasp, half sob, escaped her lips. Eleanor set the cup down with deliberate care. "But with people," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "you made a different choice. You decided who deserved to be here. Who was worthy, who needed to prove themselves." Jessica shook her head weakly, tears welling again. "I was wrong," she whispered, each word cracking as it left her. "I see it now, I see it everywhere." Eleanor leaned back, her eyes softening slightly, though they still held the weight of oceans. "You can't undo what you did to me today," she said. "But you can decide who you become after this." Jessica bent her head low, tears dripping onto the carpet. Passengers nearby sat silent, every ear turned, every breath held. A businessman gripped the armrest, a woman wiped her eyes with her scarf. Even the hum of the engine felt quieter, as if the plane itself listened. Eleanor looked away at last, her gaze returning to the clouds. "Serve with your hands, Jessica, but live with your heart," she murmured, almost to herself. Jessica stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling in shallow waves. For the first time in her life, she felt the vast distance between doing a job and truly seeing another human being. She turned slowly, her body heavy, and walked back toward the galley. But each step no longer felt like serving a passenger. It felt like serving a sentence she had written for herself. Inside the galley, Jessica